Invincible is finally back with Season 3 of the show, and after delivering us the first 3 episodes, it's clear to see that division is a core theme at the heart of this season, along with doing the right thing and being helpless, but doing wrong in order to save the world. With parallels to Season 1 between Mark and his father, but now it being Mark and Oliver, and us also learning more about Cecil's backstory and how he himself used to share the same mindset as Mark. I'm strapped in for this season, and I can't wait to see how it's going to go down. So with that, let's dive into the episode and discuss all things. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Mark is stronger than ever, quicker than ever, and more agile than ever, and we saw him utilizing all of that in the first 3 episodes and undergoing extreme training methods. Whether that being going up against Cecil, chasing after his brother, and even battling with his inner demons. Mark is still living in the shadow of his father, and it's something that he's forever trying to escape from. But that darkness that Nolan has and the Viltrumite DNA that makes up 50% of his body does take a hold of him from time to time. However, Mark was actually exhibiting fatherly behaviors towards Oliver in the first 3 episodes. Scenes such as them playing catch with each other was like a throwback to Season 1, and when Mark was teaching Oliver how to use his powers, that was reminiscent of older seasons as well. However, despite all of that teaching in the physical sense, it's the mental game that Mark's going to have to work on, as Oliver seems to view killing as not really a big issue, just like how his father did. Mark and Cecil's confrontation was a moment in this episode which was really important, because it showed that they both once shared the same beliefs and values in not wanting to reform the criminals and superpowered individuals that once caused damage, to now, decades later, Cecil being on the other side of the fence. There was a line that Cecil said which was originally spoken to him by director Radcliffe, which was, "You can be the good guy or the guy that saves the world, you can't be both." This showed that doing the right thing isn't always for the betterment of the greater good of the people on the planet. Sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice something, whether that be your moral values, people, or something else for the betterment of the wider scale population. This is something that Mark hasn't really learnt yet, but I imagine over time he probably will. With Cecil working with Darkwing and Sinclair in reforming them whilst in jail, this was something that Mark disagreed with and made him question if he should have actually killed them, like he believed he did to Angstrom to stop them from ever being able to be on the streets again, even if it was them being part of the GDA. I think there are definitely tough times ahead for Mark. We saw that he said that he was struggling with being a superhero, a son, a brother, and a boyfriend, and I think he's eventually going to crack. I actually think he might be driven to the point of killing. We saw him erupt on several occasions in these first 3 episodes. First was with Multiple, and the second was with Cecil, and I feel like it's planting the seed for Mark crossing that line like he did with Angstrom and becoming the very thing that he doesn't want to be, the likes of Darkwing. We saw him even question if he was any different, as he believed he killed Angstrom, and that's something that will ultimately be down to him to decide. I think he is different, but with Oliver's seeming thirst for the blood of villains and not truly having a moral code yet, I believe the death that could surround him might start to impact him. The theme of division. This is a theme that's definitely going to be at the core of this season. We saw that Mark and Cecil were divided because Mark didn't like the fact that Cecil viewed him as dangerous, and he put a weapon inside of him, along with the idea of reforming former villains and getting them to work with the Guardians of the Globe in desperate measures. The Guardians of the Globe were also divided because many of them felt like Cecil viewed them as disposable and replaceable, and it also felt like division was going to be present between Mark and his brother, Oliver. This is because Oliver seems to share the same dangerous mindset and philosophy as what their father had, and that philosophy is that a life isn't precious and it's okay if people die, especially if they're just normal. Oliver already viewing his life as more valuable than the people he's supposed to protect is something that I think is extremely dangerous and could paint a dark pathway for him. As well as that, I also feel like Mark still has that hangover of not wanting to become his father, and the shadow that Omni-Man cast over the planet looms over him thick. We saw this mainly in episode 1 when we witnessed Rex being beaten to a pulp by Multiple, and he unleashed havoc on him. Plus, when he was being taken down by Cecil, when the frequency was intercepted, he went into pure chaos mode, showing the dangerous side that he has within him and that he's definitely his father's son, something that was made apparent by the shock on the Guardians' faces. This is a side that I imagine we're going to see more of over the course of the season, but with him threatening Cecil and holding him by the neck, he's jumping straight into violence a lot more than what he used to. So that divide is something that still seems to be present in his head. How is Angstrom Levy alive? One of the final things that we saw in episode 3 was Angstrom Levy casting a watchful eye on Mark and the family. We were led to believe that Angstrom was killed by Mark in the season 2 finale, so it begs the question on how he was still alive. Well, it seems like he must have survived the attack that Mark carried out and was healed in some way. This is something that is going to tie into the wider plot that could be on the horizon about the Invincible War, which Levy is going to have a hand in when it comes to bringing the darker Mark Graysons to the dimension that we're familiar with and pitting a war against him. Mark finding out that Angstrom is still alive is something that will probably make his conscience feel a little cleaner, as it will mean that he's no longer a murderer, something that's clearly been on his mind. Debbie's loneliness. Debbie spent a lot of Season 2 battling with grief, something which was most apparent in Episode 4 of Season 2, but in this season it feels like loneliness is something that she's going to be tackling. She's got her family back in Mark and also Oliver, and Oliver also gave her somebody to care about and take care of whilst she was overcoming that grief. However, with all of the secrets and trauma that she's endured over the years, she's had nobody outside of her family to be able to confide in. This is why we saw her on a date with Paul and why she ended up revealing everything to him about Mark and Oliver. A line that struck me was when she was washing the dishes and Mark asked if she wanted him to take over. She said, "No, it's okay. It makes me feel normal." Debbie is the passenger in this journey, but she's the driver of her own arc, and even though she doesn't have powers, her life is dramatically impacted by all of those that do. And holding on to all of those secrets is something that's probably weighed heavy on her mind for many years. So she doesn't actually feel that normal. She's not had a normal life ever since being with Nolan, so that's probably something that she's craving to feel again. Hence why it feels like Paul will be a character that will be able to bring that stability, grounding, and a sense of real world to her. I like Debbie as a character, and she's had some great stories over the years. They've been selected and written so well, so I feel like this is probably going to be another one that will be too. I wonder how she'll react if Nolan ends up coming back to Earth in this season, as, after all, he did say in Season 2 that he missed his family. Episode 3's opening scene. One scene that I thought was just simply beautiful in this episode was the opening scene to Episode 3. There was a key line that was spoken in Episode 2, which was, "You can be the good guy or the guy that saves the world. You can't do both." This was something that highlighted the fact that in order to build towards the greater good, you'll most likely have to do something bad, showing that you have to go against your moral code and compass from time to time. That going against the grain was something that was present in this scene specifically. Through no words being spoken, we saw the struggling relationship of two individuals that needed cash because they were behind on their rent and they were on the cusp of being homeless. They were driven to the point where they were robbing a bank and committing crime due to the desperate situation that they were in. The fact that they weren't bad people at their core and were simply doing it because they felt they had no other choice was made apparent when they saw the fear that was in the child's face the first time that they robbed a bank, and also in Oliver's face the second time. They didn't want to do what they were doing, but they were now homeless and outside in the freezing cold and pouring rain. They realized how lucky they were in escaping bulletproof the first time, and they turned their life around by getting a job in the local Greasy Spoon. The smile and wave that they did towards a child in the street showed just how far they'd come on their journey. But with their rent being increased, they weren't earning enough money in order to survive, so they found themselves in the same position as what they were in at the start, and they ended up actually getting thrown out of their apartment, which led them to then rob a bank. The destruction of the flower over time represented them turning back to the life of crime and their condition worsening, right up until that last petal fell where they were punished for their actions, showing that there was now no going back and no saving them. This scene was a heartbreaking one because it gave an insight into the struggles that people go through and their mindset that they land themselves in before committing an act of crime. These two were homeless and they felt that they had no other option. They didn't want to do it, but they felt they had no other choice. They weren't bad people at their core, and it doesn't justify their actions, but it did show that life is something that is precious, and they wouldn't have deserved to have died over that. A philosophy that Kid Omni-Man doesn't seem to believe in. Death doesn't matter if they're bad people to him. The fact that not a single line was spoken in this scene, but the emotion and message was translated across the screen so well was just perfect. It was a really well constructed scene and one of my favourite moments in the opening 3 episodes. Cecil. I actually found Cecil's section in episode 2 to be really enlightening and insightful. We haven't seen much of the backstory of the character, so seeing him on the field, going to prison for disagreeing with the director, and him living up to the title of the episode in making a deal with the devil, it showed the transformation that he underwent and the realization that he had in what needed to be done in order for the survival of the planet. He once didn't agree with the reforming of criminals just like Mark, but in his arc he saw what needed to be done and that he underwent that very reformation process that the others did too. I wonder if he feels an element of responsibility and guilt for what Omni-Man did in the season 1 finale. He said how he didn't care what would happen and how dangerous he could be as long as they had a watchful eye on him and had him on side. He didn't proceed with caution all of those years ago and it came back to be catastrophic. I feel like that's what this scene was all about with Donald. Cecil does want to get his hands on Oliver, that's clear to see. And in seeing just how powerful he is at such a young age, I feel he could end up going down a similar path to what his father did, which could cause upset in the Grayson family, damage to the city, and maybe more responsibility being placed on Cecil's shoulders. My review of the episodes. I thought the first 3 episodes were really strong. The show returned in its epic fashion and it felt like it had never been away. Each season of Invincible always has a core theme embedded within it, and I feel like Division and the focus on death is a really interesting one that's going to be explored. Whenever there's a scene where Mark just goes absolutely ballistic, it's always amazing to see. When he was with Cecil and he destroyed Sinclair's robots after that piercing sound was going around inside of his head, you felt that build-up of anger, frustration, and tension due to being paralyzed by the sound that was rendering him useless. There are several arcs that have already been established in the first 3 episodes in such a clean, seamless way, but I'm definitely most intrigued about what's going to happen with Angstrom and if it's going to tie into the wider plot of the Invincible War. Mark switching his suit and it feeling like a more darker version of him being on the horizon is something that I feel is great symbolism. The fact that the press don't view him as invincible, but Invinciboy, is something that I feel ties into that mindset that he's going to go on to adopt, because he's probably going to get frustrated with that. As much as I like a bunch of episodes being released at once, when there's only 8 episodes in a season and it feels like we've waited ages for them, 3 in one go is almost half the season, which just means that the show's not going to be around for as long. So it's a release strategy that I'm not really the biggest fan of. Either give us all of them at once or go one at a time. This is a show that is continuing and not failing to deliver, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next episode. So, there you have it, Invincible Season 3 Episodes 1, 2 and 3 ending explained.